The day I had dreamed of for years, the day I would marry Daniel, began like any other, with a soft golden light spilling through the curtains and the quiet hum of a house full of anticipation. My heart should have been a gentle flutter of excitement, but it was already pounding with unease. My sister, Vanessa, had that look in her eyes, the one I had learned to recognize long ago, the cold, calculating gleam that promised trouble. I had always known Vanessa loved to be the center of attention. Our mother, Eleanor, had always indulged her, praising her every accomplishment, while I quietly tended to the life I was building, hoping no one would notice me, or worse, try to overshadow me. Today, I thought, would be different. Today was my moment. Or so I hoped. The dress I had spent months designing was more than fabric and lace. It was a story, a private language woven in delicate patterns, tiny ivy leaves representing resilience, night-blooming jasmine for the dreams I cherished quietly. It was my declaration, my rebellion against a lifetime of fading into the background. It was, in every sense, mine. I had stepped out of the room for just a moment to fetch my veil, a simple piece of tulle, light and fragile, like my hopes that today would finally be about me. When I returned, the scene that greeted me froze my breath in my chest. Vanessa stood in the doorway, a tube of crimson oil paint clutched in her hand. My dress, the sacred garment I had guarded with love and care, was marred by a thick slash of red running from the bodice to the hem. The paint glistened, cruelly wet, as if the dress itself were bleeding. I felt my stomach twist, a cold shock running through my veins. "Vanessa," my voice faltered. I had no words for the horror of seeing years of dreams desecrated in one swift, deliberate act. She turned to me with that same unrepentant smirk. "It was too plain," she said, voice low, theatrical. "It needed life, drama." And then, almost as if rehearsed, my mother appeared behind her. Eleanor's eyes swept over the destruction in a single, assessing glance. I searched for a flicker of compassion, some sign that she would defend me, that she would see the cruelty for what it was, but it wasn't there. Instead, her gaze hardened and snapped back to its default allegiance. "You shouldn't have provoked her," she said to me. Her words hit harder than any slap. I wasn't just the villain anymore. According to her, I had brought this upon myself. Shock anchored me to the spot. The betrayal was suffocating, heavier than the air in the room, thicker than the smell of oil paint. My mother's words had cut deeper than the physical damage to my dress. They marked me as the villain in the story of my family, a story that had been written long before I was born. Then Sarah, my maid of honor, stepped forward. She didn't speak. She simply raised her phone, snapping a photograph of the ruined dress. Her hand on my arm was firm, steady. She said, "We're leaving." Her calmness was a lifeline, a tether pulling me from the abyss of despair. An hour later, sitting in the sterile comfort of a hotel room, wrapped in a soft blanket, the first tremors of shock had faded into a hollow ache. Sarah showed me her phone. She had posted the photograph online with a brief statement explaining that the wedding was canceled due to a deliberate act of sabotage. Privacy was requested, but the story had already begun its journey into the wider world. Little did I know, this single act of betrayal would ignite something far beyond the confines of my small, controlled life. In a few short hours, what Vanessa and my mother had intended as humiliation would become the spark for an opportunity I could never have imagined. A chance to reclaim not just my wedding, but my entire story. The morning of my wedding had begun with betrayal, but it was also the moment the first seeds of an unexpected triumph were planted. And I had no idea how profoundly my life was about to change.
Growing up in our family was like learning a language I never fully understood. A language not spoken aloud, but written in gestures, possessions, and glances. Every accolade, every birthday gift, every cherished heirloom carried an unspoken message about who mattered most. In our family, attention was currency, and Vanessa had always been wealthier than I could ever hope to be. Our grandmother's delicate china set, displayed meticulously in the dining room cabinet, was hers. Our father's antique wristwatch, a relic from his youth, was hers too. My mother's pearls, the soft luster of decades of elegance, always found their way into her possession. Each item was a symbol, a subtle endorsement, a quiet declaration of who was winning in the ongoing, silent competition that defined our lives. And me? I had learned early on that my victories were quiet, private, and often invisible. I spent my childhood tending to gardens, arranging flowers, designing landscapes that grew slowly under the sun's patient gaze. My currency was patience, resilience, and the satisfaction of small, living beauty. None of it mattered to the family hierarchy. It could not be displayed in a cabinet or admired from a distance. It existed only in the world I cultivated with my hands. This dynamic had always seemed absurd, but weddings, our weddings, brought it into sharp, undeniable focus. Both Vanessa and I had scheduled our weddings within the same month. I remember the sinking realization that this was not coincidence. It was an inevitable collision of desire for the spotlight, a battle for the family's attention and approval. I had tried to avoid confrontation, as I always did. I moved my wedding to the week after hers, believing it would give her the uncontested space to shine. A small gesture of peace, I thought, a gift even. But peace in our family was not honored, it was weaponized. My mother interpreted my move as a cunning strategic retreat, designed to let Vanessa shine first, only to overshadow her afterward. She whispered admiration for a ruthlessness she imagined in me. It's a bold move, very bold. But it was a misunderstanding. I had no such plan. I only wanted harmony. The one thing I refused to concede, however, was my dress. My wedding gown was my act of defiance, the one manifestation of myself that no one could claim. I had spent months collaborating with a seamstress, embedding hidden meanings into lace and thread. Tiny ferns represented my resilience, night-blooming jasmine symbolized private dreams, and the intricate pattern itself was a story of survival and quiet ambition. Every stitch mattered. Every detail was a declaration of my individuality. Vanessa, of course, had always understood the power of appearances. She could command attention with a look, a smile, or a carefully timed act of mischief. I had hoped that my careful preparation and the intrinsic beauty of my dress would protect it. I was wrong. The morning of the wedding, I felt a familiar tension settle over the house. Vanessa moved like a ghost, her silence a high-pitched hum of discontent that filled the corners of every room. She was everywhere and nowhere at once, draining warmth and calm from the air as she passed. My heart raced as I approached the final moments before dressing. I clutched the simple veil in my hands, unaware that in mere minutes, my carefully constructed world would shatter. And yet, even in the shadow of impending chaos, I felt something else stir. A quiet, persistent awareness that this day, this moment, held a pivotal possibility. The legacy of our family, the weight of favoritism and rivalry, had shaped me, but it had also prepared me. For what was coming next would not only test my resilience, but ultimately transform the story of my life. By the time Vanessa raised that tube of crimson paint, I was already standing at the threshold of a lesson I had learned too late. Sometimes the greatest betrayals illuminate the path to your own strength.
I had imagined that morning 1,000 times. The soft brush of the veil, the smooth glide of the dress over my skin, the proud, steady gaze of my family as they saw me for the first time fully adorned. But reality shattered every image I had held. The dress, the emblem of my quiet rebellion and personal triumph, was ruined. Crimson oil paint sliced through the lace, dripping down the silk like a violent, mocking stroke of artistry. Vanessa's expression was calm, almost smug, as though she were an artist inspecting her masterpiece. "It was too plain," she said, voice low and theatrical, almost savoring the moment. "It needed a little life, a little drama." I stared, frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. Time itself seemed to pause in the room.
The quiet hum of the house, the rustle of decorations, the soft laughter of the staff, all of it vanished. There was only the glistening red streaks across my gown and the cold, glittering triumph in my sister's eyes. Before I could speak, my mother appeared, as if drawn by some invisible signal of disaster. Eleanor's gaze swept the scene quickly, calculatingly. In that instant, I searched for compassion, understanding, or even anger toward Vanessa, but her face was unreadable. And then, chillingly, it returned to its usual loyalty. Vanessa. "You shouldn't have provoked her," my mother said sharply, her words slicing through the tension like a knife. My mind struggled to comprehend. Provoked her? I hadn't provoked anyone. I had tried, as I always did, to step aside, to give Vanessa the space she craved, to keep the peace. Yet, in her eyes, I had done something unforgivable. My compliance was a crime, my quiet hope, a provocation. The emotional weight of their betrayal pressed down on me. Vanessa had destroyed the tangible symbol of my dreams, and my mother had destroyed the intangible, my sense of security, my belief that someone in my family might protect me. I felt small, exposed, and utterly alone. Then, a lifeline appeared. Sarah, my maid of honor. She had been silent up until now, a quiet witness to the unfolding disaster. Without a word, she raised her phone and captured a clear photograph of the ruined dress. It was evidence, a record, a small act of resistance in the midst of chaos. Then, gently, she took my arm. She said, "We're leaving." Her voice was low, firm, and resolute, the anchor I desperately needed. We stepped out into the cool morning air, leaving behind the house that had witnessed both my lifelong struggle and my sudden humiliation. In the car, wrapped in a soft hotel blanket, I felt the first tremors of shock begin to subside, replaced by a hollow, gnawing ache. The photograph Sarah had taken had already been posted online, a simple announcement of sabotage and a request for privacy. I barely knew what to think, except that the world outside was now aware of the personal nightmare I had just endured. As I sat there, trembling and numb, a strange awareness began to emerge. This was not the end. Somewhere beyond the hotel walls, someone would see this story and something might happen. I didn't know what. I only knew that my life had shifted irreversibly. The morning of my wedding had begun with hope, only to descend into betrayal and despair. Yet, even in that darkness, there was a faint spark, a sense that this calamity, as devastating as it was, might somehow lead to an unexpected opportunity. My world had been shattered, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could be rebuilt stronger, grander, and more meaningful than I had ever imagined.
The hotel room was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of curtains were the only sounds, yet I felt the weight of an invisible audience pressing in from all sides. Sarah handed me her phone, her expression calm but resolute. On the screen was the post she had made just minutes ago, a photograph of my ruined wedding dress accompanied by a simple explanation. Due to a deliberate act of sabotage by a close family member, the wedding of Olivia and Daniel is canceled. We ask that you respect their privacy. That single message, meant as a quiet shield, had already begun to stir the world outside. Within moments, notifications pinged, alerts flashed, and my stomach tightened with a mixture of dread and disbelief. The story wasn't confined to our circle of family and friends anymore. It had leapt into the wider world. I could feel the edges of something much larger pressing in. As I stared at the screen, still trying to process the betrayal and the sudden public exposure, a message appeared that would change everything. The name on the screen caught my attention immediately. Julian Crawford. I recognized him instantly. Julian Crawford wasn't just any influencer. He was a cultural tastemaker, known for his keen eye for beauty, art, and craftsmanship, with millions of followers who trusted his judgment implicitly. His reputation was built on celebrating authentic creativity and ruthlessly exposing mediocrity. And now, he was reaching out to me. I just saw the post. That lace pattern was a work of art. To destroy it with something so crude is an attack not just on a wedding, but on craftsmanship itself. Do not let an act of jealousy define your story. His words were clear, firm, and strangely reassuring. For the first time that day, I felt the tiniest flicker of hope. Someone outside my family, someone with influence and vision, had seen my pain and had recognized its significance. More messages followed, each one reinforcing his offer. He wasn't offering pity or condolences. He was offering action. He proposed a plan to turn this personal tragedy into something far larger. A new wedding, public yet dignified, celebrating not just the ceremony, but the triumph of creativity and resilience over destruction. The idea felt surreal. My intimate wedding, meant to be a private affair for family and friends, could suddenly become a spectacle seen by thousands, even millions. The thought was overwhelming, almost frightening. But as I looked at Daniel, sitting quietly beside me with his steady, unshakable presence, I realized something vital. The wedding had never been about the dress or the spotlight. It had always been about us. "We can do this," he said softly. "We can turn this around. It's not the dress or the venue that matters. It's our story, our love." And for the first time in hours, I felt a surge of determination. I replied to Julian's messages with a cautious but firm agreement. The next steps were swift, precise, and almost miraculous. Within hours, plans were being drafted, schedules adjusted, and resources mobilized. The ruined dress, the sabotage ceremony, the betrayal, it was no longer just a private calamity. It was becoming the foundation of something extraordinary. I watched as Sarah coordinated messages, managed inquiries, and quietly prepared me for what was coming. Outside the window, the day continued with its ordinary rhythm, unaware of the whirlwind of transformation about to sweep through our lives. But inside that small hotel room, the first threads of hope had begun to weave themselves into a tapestry of possibility. The sabotage that had been intended to humiliate me, to diminish me in the eyes of those that mattered, had inadvertently opened the door to an audience far greater than I had ever imagined. And in that moment, I understood the profound irony. Vanessa had spent her entire life striving for the spotlight, but through her cruelty, she had illuminated a path for me to step into a light she could never reach. The world had found out, and soon it would bear witness. The following hours were a whirlwind, a blur of logistics, phone calls, and unexpected kindness. Julian Crawford had assembled a team of professionals who moved with the precision and efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Every detail was accounted for: venue, decorations, even a replacement dress. It felt almost surreal, as if my life had been lifted from its ordinary rhythm and dropped into the midst of a carefully orchestrated spectacle. The first major change was the dress. A celebrated fashion designer, inspired by the story and horrified at the destruction of my original creation, offered to craft a new gown. This wasn't just any dress. It was a masterpiece. Structured and architectural, shimmering with threads that captured the light in a way that made it feel alive. I ran my fingers over the fabric during the fitting, and a quiet sense of wonder washed over me. The dress was no longer merely a symbol of personal hope. It had become a declaration of resilience, strength, and artistry. Then came the venue. The intimate garden we had originally chosen was beautiful in its simplicity, but it could not contain the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Julian secured the city's grand botanical conservatory, a towering glass cathedral filled with exotic plants and sunlit atriums.
The space resonated deeply with me, mirroring the living landscapes I had spent my life cultivating. It was both personal and spectacular, private yet public, a perfect balance for the moment we were about to reclaim. Meanwhile, the guest list began to grow in ways I could never have imagined. Messages poured in from strangers, acquaintances, and people who had seen the story online. They didn't want to merely watch the ceremony, they wanted to be present, to witness the triumph over adversity, to feel the energy of a story transformed from personal tragedy into something universally uplifting. What was intended as a private, quiet wedding was evolving into a celebration of human resilience and artistry, witnessed by hundreds in person and countless more online. Through it all, Sarah remained my anchor. She moved quietly among the chaos, coordinating messages, calming nerves, and keeping me grounded. "Vanessa wanted the spotlight," she whispered one afternoon as we watched a team of lighting experts adjust the beams to highlight the natural beauty of the conservatory. "Guess what? You're going to have it now, on your terms." Her words were simple, but they carried a profound truth. The very act meant to diminish me was becoming my greatest triumph. Amid the frenzy, I had moments of reflection. I thought about Vanessa, her lifelong obsession with attention, and the ways my family had enabled her behavior. I felt anger, yes, but also a strange sense of cosmic justice. She had devoted herself to creating drama, to building a stage for her own brilliance. Yet her final act of malice had inadvertently set the stage for me to shine brighter than ever before. The hours blurred into a rhythm of preparation. Julian and his team documented everything, turning the wedding into a narrative of perseverance and artistry. Every photograph, every logistical decision, every small miracle, like securing the perfect flowers or arranging the ideal lighting, was part of a larger story, one I was finally ready to inhabit. By the time the night fell, the conservatory was transformed. Exotic plants glimmered under soft lighting, pathways shimmered with gentle reflections, and a quiet anticipation filled the air. I stood in front of the new dress for the final fitting. Its weight on my shoulders felt different from the original gown. This was not a fragile garment, vulnerable to destruction. It was armor, a declaration that nothing could touch the core of who I was. As I looked in the mirror, I realized that this wedding, born from sabotage and betrayal, was now a testament to something far greater: the power of resilience, the value of authentic artistry, and the undeniable truth that destruction can be the precursor to extraordinary creation. The first signs of triumph were visible not just in the dress, not just in the venue, but in the growing energy of the people who would soon witness the story in all its glory. For the first time since the morning's devastation, I allowed myself to smile. The road had been painful, the betrayal profound, but the journey had also revealed a truth I had long sensed. Sometimes your greatest moments are born from the shadows others cast on you.
The night before the new wedding was a strange combination of exhaustion, excitement, and disbelief. The city outside the conservatory's glass walls moved on in its ordinary rhythm, unaware of the transformation taking place within. Inside, the final touches were being applied. Soft lighting accentuated the towering plants. Flower arrangements reflected every hue of the natural spectrum, and delicate ribbons swayed gently in the artificial breeze of the climate-controlled atrium. I wandered alone for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. The events of the past week replayed in my mind, like fragments of a fevered dream. The sabotage, the betrayal, the sudden exposure to the world, and Julian's unexpected intervention. Every step of the journey had been chaotic, overwhelming, and yet somehow precise. The universe had shifted beneath me, and I was beginning to feel the ground beneath my feet solidify once more. Sarah appeared silently, as she always did, a quiet presence in the storm. She handed me a cup of tea,
her eyes meeting mine with that familiar steadiness. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "you won't just walk down the aisle. You'll walk into a story the world has already witnessed, and they're all rooting for you." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of reassurance I so desperately needed. I thought about Vanessa, the same sister who had spent her life craving attention, orchestrating drama, and commanding admiration, was now entirely absent from this world we had rebuilt. She had attempted to reduce me to humiliation, but in doing so, she had unwittingly illuminated the path to my triumph. I felt no bitterness, only a quiet sense of irony and vindication. Julian Crawford called to check on the preparations, his voice calm and authoritative over the phone. He detailed every arrangement, every camera angle, and every minor contingency. This isn't just a wedding, it's a story about creativity, resilience, and triumph. Make sure you remember that as you walk down that aisle. Daniel, my anchor through this ordeal, arrived later that evening. We walked through the conservatory together, imagining how the ceremony would unfold. The grandeur of the space contrasted sharply with the intimacy we had originally envisioned, yet it suited the story perfectly. Here, amidst the towering glass and the lush greenery, our love would be witnessed by hundreds and streamed to thousands more. It was no longer just about us. It had become a testament to endurance and the beauty that can emerge from betrayal. The dress, finally fitted and pressed, hung like a promise on the distant balcony. It shimmered with the artistry of its creation, every thread a testament to patience, skill, and defiance. For the first time, I understood that this gown was more than clothing. It was armor, and I was ready to wear it into a new chapter of my life. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by fragments of anticipation and fear. I wondered how the audience, both present and virtual, would respond. Would they sense the story behind the spectacle? Would they understand the quiet victory that had been hard won? These questions lingered in my mind, a reminder that tomorrow's events carried weight far beyond the vows and decorations. Morning arrived in a delicate symphony of sunlight and bird calls filtering through the conservatory's glass roof. I stood in front of the mirror, taking in the reflection of the woman who had emerged from a week of chaos and betrayal. There was a calm determination in my eyes that had not been there before, a recognition that I was no longer just a participant in my life, but a protagonist in a story larger than myself. As Sarah adjusted the final details of my hair and makeup, she leaned in and whispered, "This is it, Nikita. The world is watching, and you're gonna shine." Her voice, steady and warm, was the final reassurance I needed. The stage was set, the audience prepared, and I was ready to step into a spotlight that had once been denied to me. The day of the wedding was no longer a private affair. It was a celebration of resilience, artistry, and justice. And tomorrow, when I walked down that aisle, it wouldn't just be about the vows I would take, but about claiming a life that had been momentarily overshadowed, only to rise brighter than ever before.
The morning of the new wedding felt almost unreal, as if the world had shifted into an alternate dimension where anything seemed possible. The conservatory was bathed in soft morning light, the glass ceiling reflecting delicate patterns on the floor, creating a kaleidoscope of natural beauty. Every detail had been meticulously arranged, yet the space retained its organic charm. I could feel the energy of the moment vibrating in the air, a mix of anticipation, awe, and something indescribable, almost electric. As I prepared for the ceremony, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Vanessa's sabotage, my mother's betrayal, the ruined dress, all of it had been intended to diminish me, to strip away my joy and visibility. Yet somehow, each act of malice had propelled me toward this moment of unprecedented triumph. I had moved from victim to protagonist, from private heartbreak to a story witnessed by hundreds in person and thousands more online. Sarah appeared at my side, calm and steady as always. She had been my anchor, my shield, and my advocate throughout this ordeal. "Ready?" she asked, her eyes reflecting pride and reassurance. I nodded, gripping the arm of the chair as though it were a lifeline. The final fitting of the new dress had been flawless, its structured silk and intricate embellishments giving me the feeling of armor, protective, powerful, and unapologetically beautiful. Guests began to arrive, filling the conservatory with a quiet murmurs and genuine excitement. Unlike a typical family wedding, this was a gathering of people drawn together not by blood or obligation, but by a shared sense of witnessing something extraordinary. Strangers from across the country had traveled to attend, inspired by the story that had gone viral online. Their presence transformed the space from a mere venue into a living, breathing testament to human empathy and celebration. Julian Crawford moved among the crowd, his calm, authoritative presence ensuring that everything proceeded seamlessly. Cameras were positioned to capture every angle, not intrusively, but in a way that enhanced the natural beauty of the ceremony. The balance of intimacy and spectacle had been perfectly orchestrated, allowing the story to shine without overshadowing the genuine emotion of the moment. As the time for the ceremony approached, I felt a wave of emotion sweep over me. I was not just walking into a wedding, I was stepping into the culmination of resilience, artistry, and justice. I glanced at Daniel, whose quiet, unwavering support had carried me through the darkest moments. His smile, calm and filled with love, reassured me. "It's our day," he whispered. "The rest is just noise." When the moment finally arrived, I stepped onto the aisle. Every eye was on me, but not with judgment or critique. Instead, there was warmth, admiration, and a palpable sense of shared experience. The crowd was united in witnessing the triumph of creation over destruction, of perseverance over cruelty. Each step I took felt like a reclaiming of my story, my voice, and my life. As I reached Daniel, our hands clasped and our eyes met, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure and empowerment. This wedding was not just a personal victory. It was a statement to anyone who had ever tried to diminish me. Every smile, every tear, every word of encouragement in the room and across the digital world was a reminder that malice could never extinguish genuine creativity and love. The vows we exchanged were simple, heartfelt, and deeply personal. They spoke of quiet strength, mutual respect, and a love that did not need a spotlight to exist. Yet the backdrop of this extraordinary day amplified the significance of our words. The crowd, both in person and online, was silent and attentive, their collective energy a testament to the power of our story. When we were pronounced married, the applause was thunderous, echoing through the conservatory like a declaration of victory. I looked around at the faces of the guests, strangers and friends alike, and felt a profound gratitude. My private tragedy had become a public celebration, and I had emerged not just unbroken, but elevated. As we stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the illuminated gardens, the cool evening air kissed my face. The ruined dress, the betrayal, and the heartbreak had become distant memories, footnotes in a story that was far grander, far more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. Vanessa and my family remained absent, their influence now irrelevant. The world had witnessed my triumph, and I had claimed it fully, finally, and unapologetically.
The night after the wedding was quiet in a way that felt almost surreal. The conservatory had emptied, the crowd dispersed, and the cameras were packed away. I stood on the terrace overlooking the softly illuminated gardens and let the events of the past week settle in my mind. From devastation to triumph, from betrayal to public celebration, it had been a whirlwind that left me both exhausted and exhilarated. I thought about the ruined dress, the one Olivia had destroyed in a moment of malice. Once a symbol of my vulnerability, it had become the catalyst for something far greater than I could have imagined. The destruction, intended to humiliate, had instead launched me into a story that resonated with hundreds of people around the country. It was a vivid reminder that sometimes even the worst moments carry within them the seeds of extraordinary opportunity.
Daniel joined me on the terrace, taking my hand in his, and we stood in silence for a moment. There was no need for words. The night air, the garden lights, and the gentle hum of the city below said everything. "It's more than we imagined," he finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "You've turned everything around." I smiled, thinking not just of the wedding, but of the journey that had led to this point. Vanessa and my mother had tried to define my story for me, to control the narrative and diminish my presence. Yet, in their attempts to dominate, they had lost all power. Their absence from this triumphant moment was a quiet, crushing reminder that control is an illusion, and true influence comes not from manipulation, but from integrity, creativity, and resilience. Julian's messages continued to arrive long after the ceremony, praising the coverage, the turnout, and the overwhelming response from his audience. Social media had exploded with support, with thousands sharing the story of how an act of cruelty had inadvertently given rise to something beautiful and inspiring. Comments flooded in, words of encouragement, expressions of awe, and messages of solidarity from people who had faced their own betrayals and emerged stronger. I thought about Sarah, whose steady presence had been my anchor throughout the chaos. Without her, I might have remained frozen in the shock and betrayal of the initial disaster. She had been more than a maid of honor. She had been a protector, a strategist, and a friend who refused to let malice dictate the outcome. Her actions reminded me that true allies often appear in moments of crisis, guiding us toward possibilities we might not see ourselves. As the night deepened, I allowed myself to reflect on the lessons of the week. Life, I realized, was unpredictable and sometimes cruel, but it was also filled with unexpected generosity, resilience, and the power of community. The story of my wedding, ruined, reborn, and celebrated, was more than a personal victory. It was proof that courage and creativity could transform despair into triumph. I also thought of Vanessa, my sister, and my mother. I felt no desire for confrontation, no lingering anger. Their attempts to diminish me had failed spectacularly. Theirs was a quiet defeat, not loud or dramatic, but absolute. The world had witnessed my rise, and they had been rendered irrelevant to a story that no longer belonged to them. In a strange way, I felt a sense of closure, an understanding that their influence over me had always been limited to the small world I once allowed them to control. Now that world had expanded beyond their reach. Finally, I turned to Daniel, and we embraced, feeling the quiet power of shared victory. The wedding had ended, but the story it represented, the triumph of resilience, creativity, and love over malice, was just beginning. Our life together would be ours to shape, free from the shadows of jealousy and control. As I looked out over the illuminated gardens one last time that night, I understood something profoundly simple. The darkest moments can give rise to the brightest opportunities. What had started as an act of cruelty had transformed into a celebration of life, love, and the unstoppable force of determination. I, Nikita, the quiet sister once overshadowed, had claimed my story, and it was more magnificent than I could have ever imagined.